All right, I think we're ready to start. It's 10 o'clock. You first. Are you just ready? All right. Okay, I know you're here, so. Okay. Razwana. All right. Anamika. Not yet. Hassan. Not yet. Mahima here. Shubo. Not yet. Sanzai is here. Janawaz. Ati. That's just coming. Munzo. Not yet. Ezozo. Alright. Islam. Not yet. Yerin. Con here. Terry. Not yet. Tumbin. There. There's one. Okay, it's quite cold, so I heard it's gonna be better this afternoon. So hope you stay warm. I think a lot of people are late, so I will just tell you an anecdote for you to. It's really helpful if you start working out at a business. So I have a very good friend at Oxford. He's German. His nationality is German, but he's a Korean man. So he's been adopted by a German family when he was little. So he's been growing up in Germany for all his life. He's actually like 10 years older than I am. But like in UK, in US, we're all friends, regardless of the age. So although he's adopted, but his parents, I think they're very good at like upbringing. So he had a very good education. So after he did his college degree, he started working at an aircraft. So he's been working at a Lufthansa airline. It's a German airline. It's like Tiananmen in Germany. And he's been there, and like he actually rose to the vice president, senior vice president level, before he came to study in Oxford. So he's a very sort of well-rounded, like really like professional person. And what was funny was, whenever we have a meeting, he actually comes like 5 to 10 minutes earlier. So say we have a meeting at 10 o'clock, then he always comes like 5 to 10 minutes earlier. And so I was just, I was curious why. And he said, it's like he says it's like a business tactic. So if you come to the meeting place like 10 minutes earlier, and you get prepared, and you sort of can dominate the atmosphere. So that's what he said. So I was like, ooh, okay, that's interesting. But ever since, I think that it's, in many ways, it's very true, like making the time right is very important, but, like try to be in the place like 5 to 10 minutes earlier. And then, you actually visualize what's going to happen during the meeting, and it really helps you have a very productive meeting. And what was funnier was, so sometimes he can be late, there are a lot of like contingencies. So, and he always sends me a message, oh Stan, so I'll be like 10 minutes late, or 15 minutes late, so, I'm sorry. But then, he's not late. So always like, he sends this message like, oh, I'm gonna be like 20 minutes late, but he's only like 10 minutes late. So I asked him, oh, so why do you send this message? You don't have to like send me this kind of message. And he says, okay, if I tell the other person that I'm gonna be 20 minutes late, and he already thinks, oh, I'm gonna be like 20 minutes late, but my friend is actually 10 minutes late, and it gives a false impression that he's on time. So I was like really surprised. So he's such a business person. So he always like tells me about like this like different tactics. It's not actually a tactic, it's more like an etiquette. So I really want to tell you, if you want to work in a business or in any other setting after college, after school, try to be on time as much as possible. It's one of the most important things that you can do. And if possible, try to be a bit earlier, and then like get prepared and like think about what's gonna happen during the meeting. And if you're late, I mean, we're people, so we can be late, but actually like send a message that you're gonna be very late. But then you're not that late, and that really gives a false impression. Okay? So, all right, so we have how many more people coming? So I was waiting for them. It's okay. Well, next time, try to be 5 minutes earlier. So we have, okay, Cherry here, who's on here? Yeah, here. Who else? Like, I didn't, okay. Oh, Hassan here. Okay, so let's start. Okay, today is an important one because we are going to get prepared for a final term exam. Okay, so we're going to learn how to do research for global ethics. And this is to prepare for our final exam presentation. Hello. All right, so let's.
In the world, is it controlled or uncontrolled?
Yeah, so I'm actually starting with a very deep question, philosophical question for your research because global ethics or ethics itself is a philosophical discipline. So I think it's really important for us to actually know what kind of worldview I have. So we have these very big words here: ontology and epistemology. So ontology is about how the world works. And basically, have you ever heard about Plato's cave? The story behind the Plato's cave? Plato is a very, you all know about Plato, the Greek philosopher. And he basically says human condition is like a man who's kept within the cave, and he's basically within the cave. He's being hindered by all these like shackles. He can't go outside the cave, but then he can see the light coming outside the cave, and he's trying to see what's out there. So although he's trying to perceive the real world, which is represented as the world outside the cave, we're still sort of shackled by our cognition, our belief system. So that's how he describes. And that sort of, basically, Plato is trying to describe the concept of ontology. So it's the world outside existing apart from me. So if you are an objective person, if you have an objective view, you basically believe that the world outside or the world exists regardless of my action. So the first time I went to Oxford, I had this philosophy classes. It's called Knowledge and Reality. And my professor actually was describing the situation that I might be a brain in the vat. Have you ever seen The Matrix? That's a very old movie, so you might not have seen it. But there's a really old movie called Matrix. And basically it describes, how the main character, he's living this world, but that's like a hallucination. It's not the real world, but then it's within his imagination. So the plot of Matrix is closely linked with this thought experiment. So like, I might be a brain in a vat who thinks that he or she is living in the world called Earth. So you might be a brain, second brain in the second vat. I might be a first brain in I don't know, like the vat called like John, and like it might be the other brain like in a vat called I don't know, like Johnny, And it's basically saying what we perceive determine how the world works. So that's more like a subjective viewpoint of the world. So my action, my thought, and my belief determines what's going on in the world. Versus objective view is basically says, okay, the just world is out there, and it works without my involvement. It can just work, outside of me, it's just an objective world. And why do we have to study this very philosophical question for our research? Because within the research traditions, there are many different types of research. And for social research, I actually told you that one of the important characteristics of global ethics is the action-oriented, like policy-oriented. So we study a lot of theories, and we study a lot of philosophies behind, as a background knowledge. But all these amount to practice, how we can implement certain policies, and how we can actually establish certain programs to help out the poor in the world and to address injustice around the world, right? So global ethics as a discipline is very much action-oriented. We have a lot of activists, like NGO workers, like politicians, like all these people working together to address some evil in the world, right? And so that's why research in the global ethics tradition is very much geared towards social research. And social research basically says if we do something about it, if we do something about certain issue, then we can change the world. That's the assumption behind the social research. So a lot of cases, for scientists, for humanity scholars, they just describe, right, how the world. They just describe about a certain topic. But for global ethicists, we basically are the participants of the research. So we participate in the research, and we do something about it, and we basically describe and we basically evaluate how our action, how our program, or our policy makes a change in the world. So our view as a global ethicist is very much subjective point of view of the world, because it believes that once we make a change, the world works according to our action. And it's very different from the objective point of view, which says, your action doesn't really amount to anything. The world is just as it is without your contribution. It just stays there objectively. So that's why we study about the ontology. So you basically have to think, what kind of side you align with. You align yourself with. Are you on the objective side, or are you on the subjective side? For me, I'm a very subjective person. So I really believe that our perception and our action do make a change, And epistemology, this is basically theory of knowledge. And this is very important as well. So another question I received when I was studying in Oxford was, how do you know that you know? So when you say, I know something, or I know, I know my country, I know my son, I know my family. What do you mean by that? No. Understand, right? Understand, or I'm familiar with, or I have a lot of context, I've had a lot of experiences. It means many, many things. But in philosophy, knowledge is defined as a true, justified belief. This is the definition of knowledge according to philosophers. And it's really weird. Basically, it says knowledge is a belief. It's not objective. Belief is very subjective, right? Belief is something you have a firm conviction on, right? So you say you have a very firm belief on your religion, right? And if your belief is to become a knowledge, then it has to be true and justified. So you have to prove whether your belief is true and is justified. It can be justified by many other people. People can see that, oh, this is true, and this is like, oh, okay, we can actually justify it. We can accept it, right? So this is the definition. So why do we study epistemology? The theory of knowledge is to see what we believe, right? And we are, through our research, we are trying to prove whether my belief on certain issue is true and justified. You have to prove that your belief is true. If you're to say something about abortion, whether you believe it's okay or ethically right or wrong, you basically have to prove through your research that your belief on abortion, you can be against it or you can be for it, right? But then you have to prove that your belief in abortion is true and justified. And we're going to see how we can do this, right? Through the research process. That's it's very deep. I don't think you actually hear a lot of this from many other, professors, but this is how I started my research. Study of philosophy and my research. And this is something that I really want you to think really hard, because when you see all these movies, Interstellar, you've watched the Interstellar, right? All these philosophical movies, they actually let me tell you about this kind of stuff, and you, according to epigenetics, it's a new brand of genetics. It basically says your environment changes according to your perception. So your cell function, you are composed of cell, right? The epigenetics, they're biologists, and they argue that your function and your actions of the cells, or your livelihood of the cell changes according to how you perceive the world. So if you have a very positive and if you have a very very sort of forward-thinking view of the environment around you. Environment can include the people you work with, you live with, or the tasks that you're given with, or your future, what you think about your future, all these stuffs are included in your perception. And the biologists basically argue that it's not about the environment, it's not about the objective environment outside that determines who you are. It's not your mom and dad, it's not the genetics that you're given with that determines who you are. It's basically how you believe, how you perceive that determines who you are. And cells function according to your perception. So, it's a new kind of brand of biology. So a lot of experiments are being done to prove, as usual. But again, it's a sort of a fight or the argument between the subjectivist versus objective view of the world, as well as the knowledge, right? Okay, I think I covered. Okay, let's read. Yeah, so there are different categories of the worldview that you can take to research. But these are sort of difficult, so you don't have to think too deep about this. But I want you to really remember that if you have a sort of subjective ontology, then you really believe that you can make a change. And I emphasize that global ethics is all about your action and how to address the social injustice. So a lot of global ethicists, practitioners, they believe that by our action-oriented research we can make a change. Whereas there are people who just think that the world exists as it is, regardless of how we think or how we act, right? And these people through their research, try to describe how the world works. So a lot of natural scientists and statisticians, some social scientists, they have this view. So they believe that the world, the social order, the natural order of the things is very constant, and the human action doesn't really amount to any big changes. So this is a big difference, right? And also epistemology, basically subjective knowledge believes that, like how you perceive changes the world. Whereas objective knowledge basically says, oh, there's a objective world outside as it is, and you're just there to observe. So it's a very different worldview. And you basically have to see, what kind of side that you're aligning yourself with, what kind of view you have, in your research. And I'm going to ask you what kind of view you have in your research. I mean, I'm not going to ask you to take either this one or that one. It's your choice, But then I really want you to sort of specify what kind of view you have in your research. Alright, so according to your worldview, it determines the types of research. Okay? Alright, Cherry. Right. So there is a descriptive research, and basically, as the term says, it's trying to describe what's going on in the world. So I mean, I'm gonna give an example about the prison, the prisoners. And if you were to have a research, and we can have various types, and if you were to do some research on the prison individuals from a descriptive point of view, then the question might be what amounts of formerly imprisoned individuals have trouble finding a job. So, in the States, they might have like 40 people, formerly imprisoned individuals, they have like trouble finding a job, so we can actually make a statistical sort of research on like comparing like different like percentage of formerly imprisoned people having trouble finding a job. So this is a descriptive type, and exploratory type is we are basically trying to navigate what has been unknown so far. We're trying to see, what's going on. So we're trying to have a research in new areas of inquiry. So this is new. Nobody has done this before. And we're trying to see, what kind of evidence, what kind of new stuff are emerging within the field. So if you were to have a same example, then we could say, do formerly imprisoned individuals face barriers to employment? So it's a similar type of question, but slightly different. This is to see whether we can actually find new instances of the formerly imprisoned prisoners. When they're going to the job market, what kind of barriers do they face? And this is something that has not been done before, so we can actually see the new areas of change or new areas of difficulties these individuals face. So you can see how they differ. The approach is quite different, okay? Right. So exploratory research is the most common type, and it's basically trying to see, how one factor is related with the other factor. So how question, and also why. They're trying to see what mechanism behind the phenomena is situated. So if you were to have the same example of the formerly imprisoned individuals, then we could say, oh, why do formerly imprisoned individuals have trouble finding a job? If you were to have this question, then we can actually have a lot of interviews with the formerly imprisoned individuals, and asking them, or people who have treated them as their employee. We can have interviews about why and how they face a lot of difficulties in finding or entering into a job market. And evaluative research is basically you evaluate a certain policy or a certain program. So effectiveness of a certain policy and program. And evaluative research is done a lot in policy studies. So like if you're to study social policy or public policy, they do a lot of evaluative research. So example can be, we implement certain social welfare program to help out with formerly imprisoned individuals, trying to find a job. And we can say, how does this program help? How effective it is to help out with the formerly imprisoned individuals finding a job. So the approach is very different, but I want to emphasize again, because global ethics is very normative, it's a lot of value laden. You know, we studied like utilitarianism, Kantianism, all these isms, right? And we studied them because we want to see what kind of values that we want to uphold out of our action. And those actions include like policy implementations or like, I don't know, like working for like NGO programs, you know, so it's very much action oriented. So instead of being like explanatory or like evaluative, social research within the global ethics tends to be very much action oriented. And that's why I cover the different viewpoints. All right, so policy of social research. Yeah, so I'm not like I won't ask you to like to specify all this, so you don't have to get scared. But I want to give you an introduction about different types of research. So this is a very difficult word, but idiographic is basically you're trying to find abnormal things. So say if you were to say about abnormal things. In natural sciences, they try to see the general sort of landscape or general theory of the world. Okay, idiocy. I'm trying to find an example. Idiosyncratic. All right. Okay. So let's think about research that can be conducted in China. So and they are trying to see how many babies are born every year, and then they're conducting some statistical study, and because they're trying to see the general tendency of the birth rate in China, that approach is nomothetic. This is a difficult one, so you don't have to remember, but so trying to see the general tendency, but idiographic. This is more like, but you are trying to see the birth rate of those who are born by like North Korean women who escaped from like North Korea, but then they live in China, but then they don't have the Chinese citizenship, but these kids are born out of them, right? And this is a very idiosyncratic case, right? It's a very special case, So you're trying to find the special case to describe something unknown so far. So that's why this is called idiographic. And this approach is closely linked with the quantitative versus qualitative data. I think you've heard about quantitative data and the qualitative data. Quantitative data is basically statistics. You gather a lot of information and you're trying to see the general tendency, of this factor and that factor. And qualitative data is like doing an interview. So you have a lot of like long interview, and you're trying to see what kind of abnormal or special case that arise from those interviews or those surveys. So the quantitative is number, and qualitative is word. If I can describe them in very simple terms. And a lot of cases in qualitative research, we are trying to see some abnormal cases. So say we have, if there's so that will be the general tendency. And the quantitative data is trying to see what kind of general pattern exists, out of all the cases. And qualitative data, doing the interviews and surveys and all this kind of qualitative study, we're trying to see some abnormal cases. It can happen just 1 out of 1,000 or like 10 out of like 10,000 abnormal cases, but we study about these abnormal cases to see something like special. So the approach is quite different. And inductive and deductive theory is again related with this, but we're going to cover it in the next slide. Alright, so deductive versus inductive reasoning. Right, so deductive is, I think you've heard about this example. All human beings die. Socrates So, Socrates dies. So you start from a thesis, and adding another thesis leads to the conclusion. So it's an inductive reasoning, right? And deductive is basically statistics, you know. So you're gathering lots of information. Okay, John dies. Who dies? Like, you know, like my grandmother died. You're gathering like all these instances, right? And you make a conclusion. Oh, old people die, you know. So this approach. So a lot of statistical method is using the inductive reasoning, whereas deductive is done a lot by qualitative study. So there's a difference, all right? So, and the qualitative researcher, they try to find a special case, abnormal case, because they want to see whether they can defy certain reasoning, deductive reasoning. They want to see whether there's a new person who never dies, right? So approach is very different. If you study, like if you go to the graduate study level, if you do like research, a lot of research, you'll see how they differ. Like qualitative researchers, quantitative researchers, they very, very much differ. But I'm a qualitative researcher, but I like to work with quantitative researchers because like we can actually learn a lot from each other. All right, so the research process. Whose turn is it? Right, so the research process is composed of 3 steps. The first step is observation. It's basically trying to define what kind of areas or what kind of issue I want to explore. And out of it, I have to make a research question. And making a research question is the most important step in your research. So I did the research comparing like North and South Korean education systems for my PhD thesis. And it took me 4 years to complete. And actually I had five research questions because it's a PhD thesis, it's long. But in order to make 5 research questions, that took me 1 year. Yeah, so like research question is the most important step. All right, I don't want you to conduct the real research. I mean, we don't really have time, right? So I want you guys to focus on the first step. And the second one is rationalization. It's basically you determine the issue or the topic that you want to explore, and you have a very specific research question that you want to address. And afterwards, you basically have to find out your research method. You know, how will you actually conduct your research to answer the question? So that's a rationalization. And the validation part is basically you start gathering the data based on your research method. And data collection is important, but if you want to become a real researcher, analysis part is the most important. And I told you the making the research question is very important, the most important step. The second important step is to do the analysis. And why is it so important? Because your view, your thinking is involved in analysis. I told you that knowledge is defined as a true, justified belief. And doing the analysis, basically doing the justification. You have to justify. You have to prove your research result is justified, is accepted. So it's a very important step. Other people have to see why your research or why your result is justified through your analysis. So it's a complicated process. I don't expect you to do this step, but I'll let you know how to do the first part well. This is a very important step. And I want you to write a brief proposal in your presentation, about your, maybe you can do like what kind of research methods and what kind of data you gather, like briefly maybe in 1 page. But mostly I want you to think about, the topics, and then also specify the research question in your proposal. So in order to explore the topic that you want to have a research on, you think about your experiences first, right? And it's a lot of cases it's very good if you were to choose a topic that's related with your country, because you have a lot of experiences and you have a lot of context, right? So you think about life experiences and like the stuff that you have been curious about. For me, I chose the topic of comparing North and South Korean education systems because I worked with North Korean students in Korea. I helped them to learn English, and it was through my volunteer work at college. And through a teacher, she's Chinese Canadian, but she used to help out a lot with orphans in China. And some of the orphans were from North Korea. So she used to tell me a lot about the orphans that she took care of. And she told me about these kids who don't have nationality. Although they are born in China, they don't have nationality because their parents are not Chinese. So I used to hear a lot about those stories. And when I first went to Oxford, I had this English class. It was not a normal class. I mean, it was an extra class for international students. I took the English classes, and I had I think it was on the last day, we had to make a presentation about our own country, and I chose the topic for the North Korean kids living in China. And I told you that when I first went to Oxford, they were asking whether I'm from North Korea or South Korea. So I told them, oh, I'm from South Korea, by the way. But I made a presentation about the divide and how we didn't divide ourselves. We were divided. So I covered all the histories and the refugee problems and all this kind of stuff. And that really had a good response from my friends, international students. So, all these life experiences, made me think, maybe when I have an opportunity later, I'll do something about this, I'll do some research on this. So I came to think, okay, maybe I have to do, I'm an educationalist, so let's study about the differences between us and North Koreans, how we came to have a very different education systems. And this is important, so the next part will be to read about the topic. I don't expect you to read as much as I did. I think I read more than 1,000 sources, including North Korean sources. But you guys, maybe you can actually find out I don't know, it's up to you. Maximum 10 articles or short articles, or if you can find a very good book on the topic of interest, maybe 2 books, and read them carefully, especially books they're written by renowned scholars or those who know about the topic very well, right? So they must cover important topics, on the issue. So I want you to read, articles or the books as we do in our classes, okay? And then out of you think about the topic, and then you basically out of the reading you specify your topic. Okay, you narrow down the specific aspect of the topic that you want to study more. And out of it, you basically have to find research questions. And in the real research, like I did for my PhD, normally you basically have to formulate research questions on the specific topic that has not been covered. So that's why you have to read a lot. People have studied on the topic a lot, right? So in order to find a spot that has not been covered, you have to read a lot, right? And that's why it's quite difficult to make research questions, because basically have to find a hole. But I don't expect you to do this. Okay, it's gonna be too tough. But if you can, it'd be nice. I don't expect you to do this. So you think about the topic out of your experiences, you know, and read. If you were to read articles, maybe like 5 to 10 articles, or if you were to read a book, maybe like 2 or 3 books. And then out of the reading, you formulate your research question. So it's in the form of, you basically have to answer, what do I want to know on this topic? And research question can be 1 or up to maximum like 4 or 5, okay? So you can just formulate 1 research question or 2 or 3 or 5. It's up to you. So this is the major. And I wanted to specify the references, the sources that you've read. And it'd be very nice if I could have some sources from in your own language. So like if you are from Bangladesh, you know, I'd be very delighted to hear about, you know, any article or any book written within Bangladesh with your point of view. You know, because in a lot of cases for like international politics, Russian sources have like completely different like viewpoints on certain issue from English sources. So there's actually like YouTube channels or like, I mean, there are sites which only deal with Russian sources because they have a completely different point of view. So it'd be very nice if I could hear, you know, any articles or books written on the topic in your own language or from your own country, so that we could see the differences in viewpoints. Okay? All right. So this is from this on. I don't want you to like do this like in detail, but this is right. So this part, I don't think you can actually do because you have to read a lot about the research methods. But if you want to, then you can. But when you're reading, you know, articles or books, try to find key concepts. There should be a key concept which actually covers the whole discussions or the arguments. But we actually studied a lot of concepts in this class, right? Like different concepts. Utilitarianism, you actually come across the concept a lot in your reading. If you were to read anything related with like ethics, sort of utilitarianism just comes out a lot. And try to see the concept. For me, when I was comparing the North and South Korean education system, my key concept was ideology. Because when we were divided, North Korea and South Korea, when we were divided along the ideological line. And although it was the Soviet Union there and then US us, we were divided because our ideologies are very different. So we are implanted with democratic, sort of liberal democracy in South Korea, and they were along the socialist communism. So because my overriding concept was ideology, so I read a lot of other articles and books on ideology. And like, especially on the difference between communism and liberal democracy. So I don't want you to like, I mean, I don't expect you to like go into the details. It'd be okay if you were to just do like up till like, you know, formulating a research question, that's fine. But if you can find a concept or something that we've covered in the classes here, that sort of gives a very good insight on your topic, then it'd be very nice if you could specify the concept. And this is an important part of doing the research. And then out of the concept, you can actually refine your research question. Because conceptual discussions have a lot of implications. So when we were covering those philosophical concepts, I told you that it's a toolkit. It's a conceptual toolkit that you can analyze. So that's why we cover them a lot. So if you were to have a research, if you have a concept, overriding concept, then you can actually incorporate it into your research question, and your research becomes very deep. And it has implications for other areas not related with your issue specifically, because it has like overriding concept, and you can make applications to the other fields. And then out of the research question, you basically have to determine how you collect the data to prove that your belief is true and justified. And we are studying about different methodologies. So methodology is basically, whether you're a qualitative word like letters-oriented researcher or quantitative number-oriented researcher. You define yourselves, and then out of that strand, you basically see what kind of methods exist. So there are like survey, interview, focus group, ethnography. Ethnography is a good one. And case study, participatory action and research. So this is something that a lot of global ethicists do. They don't actually just sit down and describe. They actually participate in your research as one of a person. So say you are trying to implement a certain program in Bangladesh, and they actually become a participant in the program, and they do research as one of the participants, rather than just a researcher who's trying to describe the situation. And secondary data analysis is related with the statistical method and experiment. So as a researcher, if you were to have not the master's, not very deep, but PhD and above, you basically study a lot of the research methods. And by studying them, you see what kind of methods that you want to choose to most effectively answer your research question. All right, so validation, the last part. Which turn is it? Okay, later. Fun.
Validation, data analysis, collect data, quantitative or qualitative.
Mm-hmm.
These methods, data analysis depends on type of data collected, research report, conclusion and findings.
Right. So after you have the research question, you basically have to define your research methods. And after you define your research methods, you start collecting the data. And I told you that it can be either number-oriented or the words like letters-oriented. A mixed method is basically combining them two. I'm a mixed method researcher. I work with both of them. And basically, in the data analysis, you gather a lot of data. You have, I did surveys and interviews and documentation for my research methods for my PhD thesis. Oh, I have so much data with me, and data analysis is basically trying to pin down. You have so much to read. I mean, you've read them all, but you have to present them to your audience, to your readers, to persuade that your argument is true and justified. And data analysis is basically you try to provide your viewpoint, and according to the research methods, they have a specified analysis methods as well. So you will actually learn when you go deeper. And then so the data analysis part is very important, and based on it, you basically do the conclusion. You do the findings first, research result, and based on this, you try to conclude. Basically succinctly present your argument on the topic. So this is the flow. Again, I don't want you to, I don't expect you to cover like every stage. I want you to do the first step, which is the observation part. So out of your experiences, try to choose a topic of your interest, and on the topic you read perhaps 5 to 10 different articles, like short articles, or like 2 or 3 good books. It could be in your own language, it can be in Korean, in English, or whatever, Russian, or whatever. And you see what has been written on the topic. And after reading all these articles and books, you formulate your research question. So, and to answer, what do I want to know about this topic? So the research question should be in the form of 3 to 5 questions. It's a question form, okay? And you can, maybe you can go an additional step. You can give us an overriding concept or related concept on the topic, okay? So it could be like, oh, and then specify the sources. Yeah, so give the author name, the date of publication, the title, and the publisher. Okay, at least. Okay, and if it's an internet source, like give us the what do you call it? The website address. Okay. So it could be like 5 to 6 pages long, or if you want to like put up like visualization, I mean you can sort of copy and paste them. It could be like 10, but it's to persuade. Okay, so it's up to you. So we'll actually start doing this from today, from the second class, the second half of the class, and you can actually ask me a lot of questions. All right. So the more you ask me questions, the better feedback you can get. It's an open book like presentation, you know. So after you make one, you make a draft. Like come to me and then like you know. So professor, is it okay? You know, like, try to get as much feedback from me as possible. So I think we have like three, 4 more classes to go, right? So during those classes, you know, ask me a lot of questions on the presentation that you're preparing, okay? Alright, so yeah, okay, so there are possible research topics, but I think it's too long. You can, okay. Do you want me to cover them all, or what do you prefer? We can just like just briefly read them together for 10 minutes. So the possible research topics, you know, like related with global ethics, like criminal justice, you know, and economic inequality, poverty. We're gonna cover it. I think next week or the following week. So the issue of poverty, drugs. Drugs is quite a big problem in Korea among the youth these days as well. Gentrification, immigration, human trafficking, medical ethics is like euthanasia. Actually, in Netherlands, euthanasia is legalized. So people actually travel to Netherlands to die. There are like a lot of articles on this. So if you're interested, you can read about them. Genetic engineering, reproductive rights. We've covered this on positive versus negative rights. Organ donation. It's called donation, but we actually saw that it's not donation, right? Mental health, like medical tourism is related with organ donation. You know, people actually, Israelites, the lawyer traveled to Eastern European country to get donated. But he actually paid. It's a kind of medical tourism. Business ethics. Yeah, so like corporate social responsibility. What could be like supply chain ethics. So you have a lot of textile factories in Bangladesh. A lot of my clothes, it says made in Bangladesh, like it's from Zara. But I think Zara takes most of the profit. So there are a lot of articles written on the supply chain ethics, like by the big conglomerates, like multinational companies, how they exploit. Yeah, so insider trading, environmental ethics. So for my international negotiation classes, we're doing a similar sort of presentation. A lot of them have actually chosen some topics related with environmentalism. So I think it's a sort of, I don't know, very popular topics these days. Climate change, animal rights, what else could be? Biodiversity, pollution. One of the groups is actually doing the waste management, which is brilliant, I think. Yeah, so you can choose any of the topic from here. Technology ethics. So I actually gave a lecture on AI and biotechnology and ethics to Catholic Church on Saturday last week with a lot of nuns. They're working in like various social, like hospitals, like schools, and like orphanages, you know. So, and I've told, if I have a chance, then I can give you the presentation. But there are a lot of ethical problems related with the technological development in AI. and also biotechnology. So, like privacy issue. Bioengineering, I think we're going to do the biotechnology ethics in the last class because I think it's very, very important. You know that we can make a designer baby? What do you mean by designer baby?
Yeah, you modified their DNA before they were born.
Exactly.
I want to do a presentation on that.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, so we have a CRISPR. It's a genetic, what do you call it? The scissor. So you could get it from Amazon. That's what I've heard. And you can actually modify the genes as to have a baby who's born without certain defects. So you can actually get out of, if you were to have a baby out of a father who has the AIDS, then you can actually cut out the AIDS gene and you can have a designer baby. So that's called the designer baby. And it's actually being done in China. So they made a twin designer baby out of a father who has the AIDS and then just normal mother. So it has become a really, really big problem. Yeah, virtual reality, I was actually surprised. So I was trying to register into Facebook. I actually, I had it like 10 years ago, but like, I was absent for 10 years, so I was trying to re-register it, and basically they require me to make an avatar. Why do I have to have an avatar? But it's like a must step. So I was surprised. But you guys are okay, right? Making an avatar. Right? So virtual reality morality. Digital addiction. So digital, like media ethics, like with the US elections, they make a lot of fake news, so AI can produce a lot of articles. So if it's the wrong information, who's responsible for it? Digital censorship. I think we did it, right? Hate speech. If you have to provide the freedom of speech, how much do we have to allow? There are so many like hate speech within the cyberspace. So social, cultural ethics, racial issues, religious tolerance. Yeah, we cover. The Bangladesh refugees. Rohingya, right?
Yeah.
Rohingya refugees out of the religious persecutions and trying to escape. Also, child rights, child labor. Education Act, ethics, like special needs, like with the students with the special needs, how much do we have to allow them? Ethics of. Oh, I have a question. So, in your own country, is it allowed for students to get lashes? No? No lashes in schools? Oh, that's good. I used to get a lot of lashes like when I was in high school, but okay, well that's good. Academic integrity and plagiarism, government ethics, war and peacekeeping. This is an important one. Human rights. We covered human rights in 2 times, right? In 2 classes. Political propaganda, big one. Right. Arts and aesthetics. We have a lot of ethical issues involved in arts. If you go to a modern arts like exhibitions, wow. Some of them are very grotesque. So how much do we have to allow? Allow the freedom for artists to express, and digital arts, so you can actually have a look at the listing and you can actually decide